All right, well, it's noon, so we're going to get started. Hello, everybody. Good to see you all again. It's been a while since we've done this. We took a break for Christmas, and then just very quick personal update. My family was all had the pleasure of getting COVID over Christmas, and so for about a month, we were all recovering. Very blessed that everybody recovered fine, and I still have kind of this lingering cough. If you know people who've had that, you may have heard that, and it's true. It sticks around. So if I start coughing, I apologize in advance. I'll let Zach do more of the talking today. But today we're going to get right into what could be, Zach, extremely boring, or with our high level of skill, maybe we'll make it halfway interesting. And it's something that we tend to talk about every year in some format, and that is these important numbers that kind of are updated related to tax filing. And some of it's basic. People may be familiar with it. Others, we can get into a little bit deeper topics. But we're going to share as a visual a piece that we have available. Happy to send it to anybody who requests it. All you got to do is send us an email and request it, and it's basically the updated 2021 important numbers. It's just a 2-page handout. We cover things like tax rates, standard deduction, AMT rates, and we're today we don't have time. We're going to be on here 30 minutes, Zach, but we don't have time to cover everything on here. But we thought we would pull 4, 5, 6 of the topics off of here and talk about them a little bit. And, one of the ways I think we can make this a little less boring is to put it in the context of what we see every day when we're working and we're developing plans for clients. For example, it's easy to sit here and explain the tax rates and what percentage applies to what range of income. But I think we'll make a couple of points, and okay, here's where that really makes a difference. Here's where it's not as big a deal, right? So let's just start there and focus on something as basic as the tax rate table. What we're looking at here is the 2021 tax rate schedule, and it kind of explained to us a little bit what what you and I would be looking at that would really, really cause us to really pay attention when we're doing some tax planning for clients.
Yeah, for me, I'm looking at that. I know that there's obviously 7 brackets there, 10, 12, 22, 24, but when you look at those, it's almost, most people are going to fall in one of 3. The 10 and 12 brackets are really close, and 22 and 24 are really close. But there's a big jump between 12 and 22. Mm-hmm. And then there's another big jump between 24 and 32. And so that's a big, 8% jump or 10% jump between 12 and 22. Yeah. Where if you're right there, if you're married filing jointly and your income's right around that 81,000 changeover, then your taxable income anyways, that would be an opportunity for us to look at that and say, hey, maybe your taxable income's at 84 this year. What can we do to help drop you down and get get you out of that 22% bracket down into the 12? Yeah. And the same sort of opportunity exists. Likewise, whenever your income is right around 329,000, and that's for married. If you're single and your taxable income is either around 40,000 or around 164,000, you are also on those bracket thresholds. And so there's just some planning opportunities. Not a huge thing to drop from a 12% bracket to a 10% bracket, right? Mm-hmm. But 22 to 12 is pretty big. And so if you're around,
that's almost doubling, right? You're going from paying 12% of every dollar to paying, twice that almost. So that is a big deal. Another thing that we see, a lot of times people look at these tables and they're like, well, gosh, I don't make that much. And that's true. Not a lot of people make over $628,000 a year or over $523,000 a year. However, what is a lot more common is people have events in their life that trigger unusually high years of income, right? And there's a tremendous amount of planning that you can do if you get ahead of that. It's coming. Instead of you're scrambling at the, right before tax filing, and he goes, gosh, I made all this money last year. What can I do to lower the tax? Well, a lot of times it's too late. So those are the kinds of things we pay attention to when it comes to this. The other thing, Zach, we might just explain, a lot of people these days have trusts, and I don't think they realize how bad the tax situation is for income that's in a trust. Why don't you just touch on that for a second compared to personal rates?
Yeah. So if you have investments or property or something that's in a trust, it's totally different brackets from just you as a person if you get taxable income, and it speeds up extremely quick. I mean, you can see there with just 13,000 of income inside of a trust, you're already up in that highest 37% bracket. So it's a really big deal. You don't want to end up with a situation where you're being taxed and having that income going within a trust if you don't have to.
Yeah, and so the easiest way to deal with that is you just make sure the trust is passing the income out to the beneficiaries every year, and that way the beneficiaries are taxed at their personal rates. But there are times when people would rather have the income build up in the trust, and if that's the case, you're looking at you're getting to that maximum 37%, at virtually no income. So that's just a detail. Not many people are affected by that, but I thought we'd point that out. Now let's move on and talk about another thing that changed dramatically a couple of years ago with one of the tax changes we had, and that was the standard deduction. You can explain it briefly, kind of what it is for single versus married, but also talk about a couple of the planning implications of this that we've really had many discussions with people about.
Yeah. So back in 2018, when the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was passed, one of the things that it did is it raised the standard deduction. It pretty much doubled them. And so now we're looking at, for 2021 this year, both of these, and whether you're married or you're single, they've moved up about $150 for a single person and $300 if you're married. And these will continue to go up each year within, inflationary adjustments. But the way that really affected most people is hardly anyone is itemizing their deductions anymore, unless you're someone that has you do a lot of charitable giving, and maybe you have, a mortgage on your house and you're doing the max interest deduction for your mortgage. There's a chance you could get up over that amount, but that's pretty rare nowadays. Most taxpayers are using those standard deductions, which means, hey, if you're thinking, hey, I'm going to give to this nonprofit and I'm going to be able to deduct that. Well, maybe that was the case in the past, but usually not the case anymore. So it really not so much a reason to do it for the tax benefits nowadays, but certainly we all have causes and entities that we like to support. And so it's, I'm sure they can still benefit probably more now than before.
Yeah.
Well,
I think all charitable giving starts and ends with, you have a heart for giving, right? And the tax benefits are nice. They make it easier to give, maybe give more. But I don't think I've ever met anybody who gives just to get a tax deduction.
Right.
But at the same time, you want to be wise about how you do your giving. And if there is the possibility of getting a deduction versus not, then, there's nothing wrong with being wise, right? So we see probably one of the most common things that is combating this. If somebody's coming up close to those limits, then they can do what we kind of call bunching of their deductions. Maybe you give what you would give in 2 years, you do it all in 1 year, or maybe even 3 years. And this is not going to be a discussion about charitable giving techniques today, but there are ways to do that where the money doesn't go immediately to the charity. So, again, it's just planning and looking at it. But you're right. When you made the point that very few people compared to what it used to be are itemizing today, this is exactly why. Because for most people, if they're married filing jointly, they're already getting $25,100 deduction. And so, they can they're limited on what they can deduct for their property taxes and interest on their home. So, they really got to be pretty big givers charitably for most of them, unless they've got a year where they have horrendous medical expenses that can also put them over. But anyway, enough about that. Now let's shift into, we could spend We could spend a lot of time talking about Social Security, and let's just hit on a few things we see here that are kind of the most common discussions we have with clients over these limits on Social Security. Go ahead.
Yeah. So one of the things to keep in mind if you're considering getting Social Security is, there is an income limit there's a price to pay, basically a penalty if you are still working and start Social Security and you're under your full retirement age. So that age is different depending on the year you were born. But we talk with people pretty regularly that are not yet to their full retirement age. They're thinking about starting Social Security while they're still working, and that could be a bad move for them. So just something to keep in mind there.
Well, let's give an example of that so it's easier to understand. Let's say you got somebody who's 64 years old. They're kind of burnt out. They want to start drawing their Social Security, but they're also going to keep doing part-time work. So kind of use that as an example and apply the problem they're going to be dealing with there.
Yeah. So if you haven't reached your full retirement age and you plan on working part-time, it would really come down to how much are you going to earn working part-time. If it's a relatively small amount, maybe you're making $1,000 a month or something like that, then it might make sense to still start the Social Security and make that move. But if your standard of living requires you to have your Social Security and then you're going to have to keep working and make another 40 grand, it might be just something to take a close look at and reconsider.
Well, yeah, I mean, the bottom line is that if you're making over 20,000, let's say this little chart down here on this handout, it shows, depending on the birth year, it shows what your full retirement age would be. So if you were born in 57, Social Security is going to consider you fully retired at on your 66th and 6-month birthday. And so if you're not yet that age and you start your Social Security beforehand and you keep making part-time income above this 19,000, let's call it, then all of your Social Security is going to be pretty much reduced. If you make, what is it, a 2-for-1 offset, I think? $2 for every $2 of income, $1 of offset. I can't remember the offset, but it doesn't take much to completely eliminate. So for that reason, you don't want to do this. And a lot of times that comes up in discussions with folks. Another thing that people sometimes are not as clear about is provisional income when it comes to Social Security, meaning when is your Social Security tax at zero? When's it taxed, half of it taxed as income, and when's 85% of it taxed as income? Walk us through that real quick.
Yeah. So when you're looking at these numbers here, these thresholds, that number includes all of your income. So if you are receiving a pension and you're receiving money from maybe a part-time job, and then even money from investments, right? Like if there's investment income, all of that gets factored in and your Social Security included. And they say if all of that cumulatively together is over these amounts, then we're going to start taxing your Social Security. So, most people are paying some tax on their Social Security because there's usually some additional income or over just what they're getting there.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move down to these kind of go hand in hand with Social Security. Let's talk about Medicare premiums and this thing called IRMA. It's a weird, like so many things in the tax code. It kind of talks about, you use the initials of the phrase so IRMA. What is IRMA, Zach, and kind of unpack that for us. What are we talking about here?
IRMA is basically a penalty or tax, if you want to call it that, if you have high income. And what that does is it increases the cost of how much you pay for Medicare based on how much your income was from the previous year. So you might have a year when there's some big event in your life. Maybe you have a spike and you get your income is maybe up in the 300,000 range or something like that. And then the next year after that, you get your Social Security payment and you're, what's going on? This thing's way lower. Well, what happened is Social Security looked and said, oh, back in 2020, you earned a ton of money, and that means that we're going to penalize you. We're going to make your Medicare premium go up. And so you can see here, there's bracketed amounts, and if your income falls in there. But a lot of people are surprised by that. And they said, well, my income's not high this year and I'm getting less from Social Security. Well, it's
right.
There's a squeeze period. And,
Yep.
Eventually, if you do have a one-time high income year, it'll pop back up, but everything's like a year delayed, and it can create a difficult situation for people.
Well, and just to explain how big a number we could be talking about here, let's look at the worst case scenario. Let's say somebody who's single at 500 or married filing jointly at 750, and you got a couple that between them they're making that really good money in the last year before they retire, or and they're already 65. So they have that issue you're talking about. Let's say 2020 was that year, right? And they had this last big hurrah of income. And now in 2021, they don't have all that income coming in, and they start drawing on Social Security, and they're on Medicare. Maybe they choose Medicare Part D also, which is drug benefits. These additional premiums for 2021 are per person in the marriage. So you're talking about $356.40 for Part B and $77. So what is that? Roughly about $425 a month, something like that, $430 a month, times 2. So, you're looking at about a $10,000 additional cost. Now, the good news is once you get to 2022, that it's going to then look back at 2021. And so, that problem goes away. But almost never do people come to us understanding what happened and why it happened. And so you really have to be looking forward if you have any hope to try to kind of make better decisions there and not have as many expenses associated with it.
Yeah, it's not something that people chronically deal with, but we've had situations where a client, there was a lawsuit and they received money, or there was some type of inheritance situation, or I think most of the time it's really what you said, Bob. It's right after retirement, and maybe they had a deferred comp plan or something with their previous employer, and so they just the year after they retire or 2 years after that, there's just this big batch of income. I mean, good problem to have, but we have seen that, something to keep in mind. There's sometimes things that can be done about that.
All right, well, let's shift gears. Again, we don't have a ton of time to go into depth on these, and we're happy to send this piece. I'll tell everybody again, you can look at it, write out questions, and if you've got questions about your situation, just reach out and we'll be happy to talk about them. Or maybe pass them along to people and it might help them. But let's take some time, the next 10 minutes or so, to talk about an area that comes up all the time. That is, these retirement plan contributions. If you're still working and putting money away, whether you're self-employed or whether you're an employee. And then we'll also touch on traditional IRA and Roth IRA contributions, kind of when you can get deductions, how much you can put in. Let's talk about that a little bit. Start us off with these elective deferrals for people who still are working or have their own business where they've got either a 401k, a 403b, or a 457 plan. Kind of explain where we're at on that.
These amounts would be applicable for any of you that are still working and you have a 401k or a 403b. Also, if you're self-employed, these numbers not too many of these changed this year. They get adjusted typically maybe every second or third year. They raise them a bit for inflation, but they only do them in $500 increments. And so it's not every year that they're raising. But like this year, if you have a 401k, last year you could put in 19.5. This year, same thing. You can put in 19,500 max. If you're over age 50, there's another 6,500 you can put in on top of that. Same as last year. So those amounts didn't change, but if we go down to that 58,000 number under there, that used to be 57. And so that would be like if you're self-employed and you have your own individual 401k and you're doing profit sharing in there, that went up a little bit. So that's nice.
Mhm.
But if we go farther down, defined benefit plan went up a little bit. Another thing that's often used by self-employed individuals.
Mhm.
And then if we go down, the simple didn't change. So those will change a little bit every few years, but not a lot of change there. Um, but we did get some movement there. Since they didn't go up this year, they might go up last year. I think there's a better chance.
Mhm. Yeah, and on the SEP, it's pretty much been 25% of profit for years, but that contribution limit you talked about, the 58,000, that continues to help put more money in. One thing that we've seen over the years are people who retire and maybe they don't make enough income to make this 25% come be as big a contribution as what they could just do if they did a simple IRA. Because if you're over 50, I mean, you can put in $16,500 and you only have to make $16,500 of profit and you can put 100% of that in. But in an SEP, you can only put a percentage of your profit in. So if you made $100,000, you could put in 25,000. But if you only made, $50,000, you could only put in half of that. So instead of 25, 12.5. So the simple plan would be a better option. So knowing these rules, the other problem is we see so often people come in and they have an SEP and we almost always know it's because their accountant was filling their return out and it was the year after the year for the return and it was too late to do a lot of the other options they would have had if they'd have been working on this during the actual tax year itself. So you can't do anything else. So, okay, let's do an SEP. We see that all the time. So it's one of these areas where it really pays to be proactive and look forward, not just look backward.
Yeah. And you got to set that up. You're right. I would say if you're listening right now and you have some self-employment income, if it's under 80,000, then you're going to be able to contribute more than into a simple IRA than you will into an SEP. The thing is the SEP can be done until April of next year, tax deadline for most people, but the simple has to be set up this year. So if you think your income is going to be around 80,000 for this year and you really want to max your savings and get the biggest tax deduction, give us a call and let's get started on that now.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Zach, the last piece we're going to talk about, we may hit on a few other things since we've still got about 8 minutes. Traditional IRA and Roth IRA, boy, we get so many questions about this every year and it's complicated. There's a lot of moving pieces here. So let's start with the basics. What for 2021, what has anything changed as far as what you can put in?
So the amounts have not changed there. They were 6,000 if you're under age 50, and there's an extra 1,000 you can put in if you're over age 50.
And that's per spouse if they're married, right?
Per person.
Yeah.
And so that would be 7,000 max for the year you can do. And the eligibility to do that for most people, that's affected if they're still working and they have a 401k at their job. There's income limits that kick in for the traditional IRA.
Well, let's talk about that. Here they are right here.
There's also limits for the Roth there. I would say, especially for younger folks, typically they're going to want to do the Roth IRA. That's what we see most often. And so they're a lot of times trying to max it out if they can. So that would be about 6,000 for those individuals. But there are income limits. And so if you're single and you want to max out your Roth this year at 6,000, there's a phase out that starts to kick in at 125,000 of taxable income. That's up about $1,000 or $2,000 from last year. Same with if you're married, you and your spouse, if the total household income is over 198,000 this year, then it's going to start phasing out your ability to do a Roth. So if you're under those amounts, I would say, and you expect your income to go up, let's max that out while you can. That married amount went from 196 to 198. It's going to keep moving up a little bit each year. But if you expect your income to go up faster than that, then I would say max out that Roth while you can.
Well, one of the trickiest places to be on this is when, people, let's say their salary is 210,000, and they're like, oh, I can't do a Roth. Well, wait a minute. It's not on your gross salary. It's on, you see MAGI there, MAGI. Talk about that for a second. Explain where what number these limits are really applying to.
Yeah, so these limits are applying to your modified adjusted gross income, which is not the amount that you make it. It's based closest to the amount you get taxed on. Think of it as that. So you have your deductions that you're taking from there. If you're making 210 and you're maxing out your 401k, then you're going to get 19,500 taken out of your paycheck during the year. And that's going to bring that amount down from 210 down to 190,500. That's a key level there, because you just went from not being able to make a Roth contribution at all, and being able to make a full one.
Yeah, and they may have, some employers, have HSA plans or FSA plans that are also tax deductible. They, there's a lot of potential at the employer level deductions that come off of that 210,000, and so they absolutely may still be able to contribute, and so that's where a lot of times we have to look at it every year with clients and just see, okay, where are you?
And that can be a situation where maybe somebody wants to contribute to tax deferred and Roth,
right?
And it's almost counterintuitive, but you can get into a situation because of these limits where you actually contributing to the tax deductible portion in your 401k could actually create the ability for you to do the Roth outside the 401k.
Yeah. Well, we've got a few more minutes. Let's talk about deductible IRAs or traditional IRAs and kind of walk us through that same kind of discussion.
Yeah, so the ability to make a traditional IRA contribution, again, it's going to be that 6,000 or 7,000 limit. You can make one, but what the key thing is are you going to be able to deduct that contribution, right? And if you can't deduct it, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
And so there are even more strict income limitations for most people on how much they can earn. And that is because the IRS says that if you or your spouse have access to a retirement plan that would at your job, like a 401k or 403b, then they want you to, based on the rules, it seems like they want you to take advantage of that opportunity to participate in that plan. So they make it much less ability to contribute and get that tax deduction. You can see there that if you're married and you do have access to a 401k, you can't earn anything over 105,000 without having your ability to deduct that.
Yeah. Yeah, and it gets confusing, excuse me, because so often there might be one income in the family, a married couple, and maybe there's a pretty high income there. They have access to a plan, and then the questions are around, well, can the spouse contribute or not? We generally never like putting money into a non-deductible IRA contribution, because I'll tell you what happens in the real world with that. On the one hand, you could say, oh, well, why not? I mean, I can put it in there and the earnings grow tax deferred. Well, that's true. However, when you get ready to pull that money out, people forget, honestly, they forget that they had made non-deductible contributions that they've already paid tax on. And so they end up pulling it all out and they're paying tax on it again.
Yeah.
But if they do remember, then they've made their life a nightmare of complication, because they've got to go in and they've got to do a percentage of this little amount that was not deductible versus the rest of it's all deductible, and you could pull it out and you have a ratio. Nobody does that. I don't think I've ever seen anybody who actually recaptured that. So we just say, look, if you're not eligible for a deductible contribution, that just scratch this one off your list. There are other things you can do. And I know we covered a lot of ground today, Zach. We're gonna land the plane here, but we really like bringing these kinds of things to everybody, and I hope that they're helpful. We enjoy these discussions, and we've got these pieces. We've got a bunch of these kinds of things that we're happy to share with clients, and one of the things we decided as we were planning this year, how we're going to handle Wise Counsel Live, our goal this year is to get an attorney, a CPA, mortgage experts, people like that. We're going to do one of those a month, probably every third Tuesday or Thursday of the month. And then we're also going to do sessions just in-house where some weeks we may be going through a topic like this with a visual. So I think the idea is to just continue to try to educate people, help them understand little bits and pieces. And always though, the message from us to you is that we appreciate you who are clients who are watching. We are very thorough in what we do. And there's a lot that goes in, behind the scenes when we're looking at what's the right advice for the situation you're looking at. The other message is we love to meet people who are nice and are looking for good help. And so if you feel like this kind of information is helpful, feel free to tell them about us, or if they have questions, they're free to ask us, and they don't have to worry about any traps or anything out there. If it's a fit, it's a fit. So Zach, good seeing you again on this format. I'll say one last time before we wrap. This piece is available. Anybody wants it, all you got to do is send us an email. Thank you for being here. We will see you again in 2 weeks. And we will be focused all month of February on taxes. So we will have a CPA on here in our next discussion, and we'll be digging in on the topic of taxes. Otherwise, anything else, Zach?
No, that's it. Happy to be back. Looking forward to the next one, but thanks for joining, everyone.
Yeah, thanks, everybody. Have a great day. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.